Welcome to the inaugural recording of the WannaCyber Podcast. It's a place for me and my friends to talk about the things that matter to us in the world of cybersecurity. The whole purpose here is just to pull back the curtain a little bit on what the business of cyber looks like, getting into the world of cyber. My intention is to lower the bar. I'm primarily talking about the barrier of entry, but you know what? We'll probably lower the bar in a couple of other ways as well along the way. I'm Pete Hay. I'm the CEO of Arbiter Security. Along with me is one of my favorite people on the planet, Rachael Skillman. Rachael, why don't you introduce yourself real briefly?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Pete. You're also one of my favorite people on this planet, so I'm really happy to be here with you. My name is Rachael Skillman. I am the VP of Services at Arbiter Security, and over my career in cybersecurity, I have developed or just really honed in on a passion for people and a love for making sure we pull all the right people into cyber. So I'm really excited about our conversations today.
A little bit about my background. I have, like many people in cyber, I've bounced around a fair bit, but my original introduction to the space was as a tiny nerd, as a small kid. I ran a company called PC Pete's, where I would build and sell computers, not at all pirating Windows copies to make more money along the way. And I left the cyber and IT sphere for a while, came back to it in 2009 when I was in the Navy and became a cryptologic technician. Now they're called cyber warfare technicians, and I can't decide if that's cooler or more preposterous. And since then, I've done things like teaching. I've worked at range providers. I've built content, training content, all kinds of stuff like that. Rachael, tell us a little bit about your background. Like, what was your journey to cybersecurity like?
Well, I guess my journey in cybersecurity started really young because my parents both are in the cyberspace. And so it was in our house, and it got to be fun conversations at the dinner table. And my mom and dad always tried to help us see all the ways we could get hacked and things. So we kind of lived in this world of trying to imagine being hacked, which was always a fun way to grow up. And then you add a little fear into your life, but also
No,
just
no, it sounds
skepticism. It's great.
sounds really
It's
casual. Yeah, yeah.
add that adventure that you don't usually get into your day. Walking down the street, there's a camera. All those things that you're not aware of that you became hyper aware of in that family. So I'm very grateful for them and just kind of making it a part of our lives. So all of us are very cyber aware. And then picking what you wanted to do and where I wanted to go, I started in development and building products for SOC analysts and helping make their lives easier. I went into a fun world of marketing and helping marketing teams define what is cool about the technologies they were marketing within cybersecurity. And now I work with you. And so it's been a fun journey getting to see so many sides, but I've gotten to experience all the different people and types of people that are needed within cybersecurity. I didn't take the full nerd path and get to stick on it, which means I get to see all the skills that are actually needed to help the full nerds do what they do.
Today's title is called The Phantom Menace, and the menace that we're talking about is cyber, right? The mystique, the elitism or obscurity of it. We joke about security through obscurity, but I think cyber is obscure for a lot of people who don't know the lingo, don't know the acronyms. I actually when I was at the NSA, I worked for a guy named Chris Betts, who's now the CISO at AWS. And Chris used to run meetings where he did not allow the use of acronyms. And his whole point was, I don't want someone to have correct knowledge or a good thought or a good point in their head and to be excluded from providing that because an acronym that they weren't familiar with was used. And it's exclusionary. It keeps people out. And I'm really lucky to have had people like that early on in my career. I think the other thing was because I came back to cyber after having been in it and then left and came back. I'm very lucky that I came back to this field kind of as an adult newbie, if that makes sense. And I went through some of that feeling, and then I had people who worked hard to demystify cyber. So the Phantom Menace is the mystique. So we're going to talk about two primary topics here today for this podcast. The first one is, how do you get into cyber? We're going to try and remove the menace of what it takes to get into cybersecurity. We're going to share some of our experiences and thoughts along the way, talk about a couple of articles that we've seen. And then the second topic is is that much of what we go through in cyber is not as hard as it should be, or maybe it's harder than it should be. What do you think, Rachel?
I I would say it's not as hard as it's perceived to be. Really, I think the words are scarier than the actions, and it's one of those times where you look back and you kind of view and say, "Was that it? Is that all?" And I kind of feel this about adulting. You step out of college and now you're an adult, and you're like, "Is this it? Does this really mean I'm an adult?" And probably just acknowledging that we all feel that way to some extent. We're all at that point where you question, I've been here a year. Does this mean is now when I'm in cyber? Do I have another year to go? When does that switch flip? And it doesn't flip at any point in time.
I think I actually think the adult comparison is a really good one because there's so many things that I think there's kind of a human nature aspect involved where we're kind of looking for the easy button. Like what's the secret to anything? Getting in shape. It's like, well, you work out regularly, and you every day, regularly, and you got to rest properly and things like that. But it's not difficult to do, but it is not necessarily complicated. Are there things you can do to make it more efficient and effective? Absolutely. But the most important thing is to strap on your shoes and go. Is to walk out the door. I have a friend of mine who runs marathons, and he said the most important part of your run is the steps out the door, right? The steps to the curb. That's the most important part of your run.
Well, and I think if we continue that analogy for a second, as you make that step and say, "Hey, I want to become a runner and I'm going to do this," there's so many people out there that's like, "Awesome, I was on that path. I'm now at this point and I would love to help you." And that is not unique to what you see in just running. Like you see that in the cyber world too. The minute you're willing and brave enough to raise your hand and say, "I'm struggling, I need help," or "I'm scared," like there are so many people that are just, I found such a welcoming community here when you're freaking out or feeling the imposter syndrome that we all feel at some point. And yeah, I think that's a great analogy.
Awesome. Well, let's get into it. So the first part, when we talk about hiring, I've found two of my favorite articles recently are both from Dark Reading. And the reason they're my favorites is because they are in direct and complete opposition to one another. So that amuses me greatly. So the first one is an article that says, cybersecurity job hunting may come down to certifications. And the thing I want to say here's my disclaimer. Let's take a look at who this article is talking about, a study, but let's take a look at who conducted this CyberSeek. Okay, well, who's CyberSeek? Well, it's a joint project between a certification organization, CompTIA, labor market analyst Lightcast, and NICE, which is a standards organization, and you've got a certification organization who uses those standards to define their certs. So, just as a thought, perhaps
They might be slightly biased.
they may have a point here. They may
Tiny.
have a perspective that they'd like to support. But there are a couple of things here, and I don't want to speak ill of CyberSeek because I think what they're doing is really, really interesting, and from an entry level position, valuable. So I just want to I don't know. I want to put like the trigger warning or the bias warning here that there is a perspective that they're coming from. So let's talk about it. So they say that there are 500,000 cybersecurity positions open. What do you think? Consistent with your experience?
Uh, you see all of the open positions on LinkedIn, yes. Now, I think recently I haven't seen those open positions close as much as I have previously.
I think that I've actually seen some articles written recently about some companies that may not actually be really advertising positions. They just put positions out there in an attempt to seem like they're vibrant and hiring and growing and stuff like that. I don't know. I've never been part of an organization that would do that. I would not want to be a part of an organization that would do that. But one can certainly understand why there might be a benefit derived from that.
I also can see where and things I've seen is where organizations say we need X number in cybersecurity, like we have a need for 10 more people within our cybersecurity team, and they don't actually have the business funds to make those positions open at that time. And so though there's a need, and I wonder always if those job needs are more what's driving that statistic of having, what was it, 500,000 job open positions in cyber. I always wonder if it's we need that many, but do the businesses, are they building their structure in a way that they can hire that many?
Oh
Is
man,
an open question for me.
we're gonna
I know,
talk a
I'm so
lot about
excited.
that when we get there. And that's a soapbox I'm prepared to
I'm
die
ready to
hideously
unpack
upon.
it.
Yeah, hill I'm ready to die on. So CyberSeek, like I said, I don't want to speak ill of them. I think the cool thing that they're doing here is they're providing this heat map of job postings against the certifications that are either you can do it from like which certs you hold, and it can show you a heat map in the country where those positions are available. Conversely, you could look at other regions and see which certifications are highly desired there. I think that's super valuable. One of the things that I've always been, and this is probably a result of my childhood, if I'm honest. We moved a lot when I was a kid, so moving is not scary to me. And then of course in my time in the Navy, I think I lived in 9 different states while I was in the Navy for 7 years. So, those are not abnormal or shocking things to me to just relocate for a job. I recognize that not everybody wants to do that. And man, in this remote work post-COVID world, I I am torn because, as you know, I am a big believer in remote work. On the other hand, when it comes to entry level positions, I am I really understand why it might be advantageous to be physically co-located with your team. What do you think there?
Oh, so this one tugs at my heartstrings, and this is an unpopular opinion. So I'll just start with saying that, and I'm hesitant to say it at all, but I I think there is such a need for remote work to support some certain lifestyles. For example, being a mom, being a military spouse, both the things I
Mhm.
am, and the flexibility that hybrid and remote jobs offer make it possible for me to continue my career. However, I also have seen people who live 2 minutes from the office and the headquarters, and they're like, I need to work remotely. Like, do you? Because you're kind of ruining it for me who physically needs to work remotely. And so it's it's this fun thing. I think there is value in going into an office, from building a culture, building an organization. I do think as we've grown in the United States, I'll center it there, we should at least be able to support a flexible understanding per person. But I, especially for new hires and new starts, I see the need. It's just so much easier to bring them up, to get them to a good understanding in an office. And I know for myself, for my first job, I was very fortunate to start in an understanding organization, and they actually flew me out every month. And so I spent a week on site every month, and I worked from the middle of nowhere in Kansas because that's where we were stationed at the time. And that kind of hybrid flexibility model was very, I was very thankful for, because it worked with my lifestyle that I couldn't control. But I also came to appreciate being in the office, to be trained up and to be around the others. I learned more than I could have sitting in my own cubicle office at home. So,
So I think I'm very torn on this one. I don't know that I have a particular horse in this race, so to speak. I believe that there's a certain set of skills that are required to be an effective remote worker. And I think there's a certain set of skills that are required to be an effective in-person worker. And I think that those skills overlap pretty significantly. But there are some outlier skills that are very unique. I'm a sports fan, and working in an office leaves me highly tempted to spend entirely too much time talking about sports at the water cooler, so to speak. The especially, oh good, heaven forfend, we have a fantasy football team locally or something like that, or
oh
league.
no, no office fantasy football here.
Exactly right. But so, like, again, skill set is to remain focused and not get distracted because you're a people person. And conversely, As a remote worker, there's a different skill set involved in stimulating interaction with between coworkers when you're working on something new, or gleaning advice or input or getting mentorship or what have you. And so
I mean, I
I
think there also is that variation of it's different distractions at home, and you need to
yeah,
have
yeah,
the mental fortitude to stay focused on your work given all the other things that are around you and all the other distractions that could come out, and the fact that no one's there kind of adding that social pressure to
right,
stay committed to your work. So I think it
right.
also goes back to distraction like you were talking about.
And then the flip side is, we've seen studies that show that the average employee is basically getting between 4 and 6 hours of work done per day. And that's irrespective of whether they're in person or remote. And it's really interesting that, it varies study to study what they show. And I think there's also some variance across different types of work roles, et cetera. But, personally, when I started my remote work, one of the things that I made a commitment to, I've had a couple of moments in my life where I made a commitment. When I joined the Navy, I made a commitment that I was going to change my life. And you're going to laugh, but the thing that changed my life more than anything else was I committed that I would never snooze an alarm clock ever again.
Okay.
And I think maybe a handful of times since then I actually have, and almost every single time I've been sick. But it's not two handfuls of times, and it changed my life. Another one was when I kind of came into remote work and I committed to myself that I was going to give my boss 8 good hours of work, irrespective of how many hours it took me to give him 8 good hours. Because, like you said, we have distractions at home. I have a new puppy. I assure you, he's distracting. The number of times I've had to go replace a cord that has been sacrificed. But, you know, it doesn't matter if I got distracted today. Like I owe my boss, even if that's me, right? And that's the worst part about owning your own company. Your boss knows everything. The but the reality is, like, I owe 8 hours. I owe 40 hours a week minimum. And it's up to me to get there. And that's one of the things that I've approached. And it doesn't have to be that way for everybody. Some people are, and I recognize a lot of work is creative. And so I think the flip side of that is acknowledging that just because you've taken your dog outside does not mean you're not sitting there thinking about the thing you're going to do when you go back to your desk. So that's not lost time. It's not work that hasn't happened. So I'm completely comfortable saying, you don't have to deduct 15 minutes because the dog didn't want to come in and you were running around the backyard trying to get I'm sorry, trauma speaking there. But the point is, instead of just letting the dog out and then go back to the computer, it took you an extra couple of minutes. That you don't have to deduct that if you're literally chewing on things. And I think and actually another one of those skills that's really important is recognizing I'm stuck. Sitting at the keyboard is not going to help me at all. It's a great time to transfer a load of laundry. I do a lot of laundry while I'm working. I don't know why I have so much laundry. There's just me and my son, but
I should learn from you.
it's actually one of my preferred, like, I'm irritated things is to go grab a bag, grab a hamper and go throw it in the wash, because then at least, like, I may be stuck, but something good is happening. So
Minor dopamine hit by I started my chores and that's all I needed for the day, and that's how I break through.
Sometimes you hit the wall and you're just like, I just need any win right now. And it could just be
I
like I'm gonna
just
have
need to
clean
check
socks.
something off. That's where you write
Exactly.
doing laundry on your to-do list just so you can cross it off 2 seconds later.
Exactly. All right, so
Well, I did it.
let's get back into the article. We got distracted. So here's the thing that I think is unique about what CyberSeek gives you. It gives you a way to increase the employability of your person by being willing to say, do I live in Fresno, but there are better opportunities in San Diego. Plus, San Diego is infinitely better than Fresno, so therefore I'm going to try and go to San Diego or something like that. There are cyber hotspots. There are certain businesses that are located in certain regions. If you want to work in the financial industry, you're going to be looking at North Carolina, where Wells Fargo is based. You might be in, strangely, Cincinnati with U.S. Bank of America, another big bank.
Yeah.
You might end up, Deutsche Bank is in Jacksonville, Florida, of all places. So if you're interested in experiencing humidity and the Florida man, you could look at working there. But the point is, like, if you're like, no, I really want to get into this kind of like big financial cyber business because there's a lot more risk management that comes with that. There are regions, there are like geographical regions where you could be searching for jobs that are going to be more likely. And I think it is a natural thing for a company that's doing hiring in cyber to be, I was going to say biased, but that's not the right word, to have a preference for people who could show up in the office for fewer dollars than someone who lives across the country. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I also think, especially when you get to the bigger organizations, they like doing fun things. They like spoiling their employees. They can put so much more into those events if they're not also flying everyone in from halfway across the world. And it builds in a large organization. I've worked for a couple of defense contractors and things, and it's sometimes, I don't know, it's easy to feel like you're a small fish in a big pond. And I noticed they focused a lot on just trying to make sure people felt appreciated. And I can't be surprised that they're looking for people near the office so that you can come in and get that human interaction and they can actually understand that you are happy in your job and doing what you want. How dare they care about you that way? That's terrible.
Yeah, that would be awful. So I think there's
Awful.
one piece of what CyberSeek is doing here that I think is really interesting. The other piece is this. I've just highlighted it on your screen. You can compare the number of professionals who hold various certifications against how many job openings. So in this case, we're looking at Security Plus. Almost over 250,000 people hold that cert. However, there's only 70,000 job listings. That is what we would call, that's a buyer's market, right? The person with the job posting has
To take
potentially
their
a lot
pick.
of, that's right. Flip side is, and this is the thing. So I have a complex relationship with certifications. I recognize that they exist in many people's mind as a yardstick. I think they are valuable if they are being used as a substitute for the years experience. And you know that I deeply personally loathe the years of experience yardstick for
You
hiring.
really do.
I really do. I really do. Well, because it hurts smart people who are young. And I know the Department of Labor has defined age discrimination as people who are over 40 and as someone who has just gone over 40. I don't get it.
I was just going to go back to, because I think it's interesting. And one of the things I love and hate about certifications is when I like how you said when you use them to exchange years of experience and you kind of have that ebb and flow, but I think that stems across the need for the certification to actually test you on something that a professional in the world for that many years or in the profession for that many years could get the certification without. Sometimes I find certifications you have to study for the test, and it's so different. The learning curve is so different when you actually go get into the job. And that's for many reasons I've noticed in a couple of certifications, but I think that's one of the things I don't love about certifications. It's hard to go backwards. Does that make sense?
My standard for certifications is this: whatever the acronym is, right? So I'm going to pick on CISSP because I think in many ways it's the most egregious for the thing I'm about to talk about. And again, if you're CISSP, please don't hunt me for sport over this statement. It is not that I think it has no value. It's just, let me explain, and then you can hunt me for sport in the comments.
Then you can later.
Yeah, here's my feeling. CISSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. I have been an information systems security professional since, we'll say at the latest, 2009. I actually got my first certification in 1999, but we'll say 2009. So for 15 years, I have been an information systems security professional. I've worked at the NSA. I've worked for the NSA. I've worked at the Absolute, doing some of the coolest stuff I've ever done in my life. The fact that as an information systems security professional, I cannot walk in and maybe with a couple of hours of brushing up on terms and definitions, the fact that I can't walk in and pass that cert is my problem with CISSP. It's not that it has no value. I think they've done an interesting job of creating a lexicon, a way of thinking about cybersecurity, etc. I think all of those things actually have value. My issue is that value, or that what it provides, is not a certification of an
Um,
information system security professional. I think it's actually more of a risk management certification. And so if they called it certified information systems risk management professional, I would not actually have an issue with that, because I think a lot of the way that domain, the way they've structured the domains and then prioritizing actions within those domains, I actually think that's a really effective way of thinking about risk management from an information security systems perspective. But it's not a certification for an information system security professional. That's my beef with it. And so when I look at certs that I like, that's my standard. Go look at what the acronym describes and ask yourself, if I was one, I
could I
pass
pass
this.
this?
That's right. And, again, you have to have a perfect score? Nope, because there are going to be, there's always going to be specificity, or, a particular turn of the phrase, or, lexicon or what have you. Not an issue.
But that's
But,
realistic to the world we live in, anyways. I mean, just the way people implement their plans and their incident response plans are slightly different and slightly varied. The way people assess their risks and to determine their risk tolerances are always going to be slightly different and slightly varied. So I think having that slight bias within a certification exam, it is just,
it's acceptable.
it's
It's acceptable.
acceptable. And part of studying for the exam is acknowledging the biases and frameworks that they've set up and defined for their examination. And so I think that's slightly realistic. But I agree with you. You have to be able to, it shouldn't be a huge leap for those that have been doing it for so long within industry. Like it should be a back and forth, and you shouldn't have to have professionals study for 5 years who have been doing this for 15 to get a certification, to just have that checkbox on their resume.
I think what you just said there, the huge leap, is a really important concept. And here's where I'm going to invert that and raise it. I think it should be a big leap for people who don't have that industry familiarity. Yes. And it's why, I know some people have raised issues with OSC of recent days because they feel like, some of the exams are getting dated. I don't have an opinion on that, but here's the opinion that I do have. It's complicated and it's challenging, and you have to do a lot of legwork to pass it. It is less difficult and less challenging if you're functioning day to day as a red teamer. To me, that cert has more validity as a yardstick, because we're about to shift to talk a little bit about hiring, and I'm getting ahead of myself because there was still one more thing I want to get into in this article, but I'm going to say it so that I don't lose it. But if we're talking about a certification as a yardstick, then it should be something that is relatively less difficult for someone who has expertise already, experience already, or relatively more difficult for someone who does not. And I think that's the other place where I take a little bit of issue with CISSP. It is functionally the same amount of study, whether you have a lot of experience or little experience, or maybe the delta is not very great, is the right way to say that, because there is a delta there. And then the terms and definitions that you have experience. So, there's less delta there. And in my opinion, there needs to be a significant delta that is essentially made up by your hands-on experience, which is another thing that's very important to me. Here's what I wanted to say about this article in Cybersecurity, though, before we close it. So here's the really interesting thing. Different certs matter. Different opportunities matter. And there are two things that I'm seeing happening. One, these other certs are being accepted in lieu of. So you no longer have to have Security Plus as a hiring criteria. Some of that comes from the government, and the 8570 going away and becoming 8140 standard, which allows for a standard of training or experience in lieu of specific certifications. Yeah, exactly. I think the other thing that we're seeing is like these smaller organizations building their own certs, like Junior Pen Tester. We see groups like TCM, Cyber Mentor Security. We see the Taggart Institute. We see different groups like that creating certs where we're talking about the entire course of training and certification might be $50. I love that because it lowers the barrier for entry, doing away with the difficulty. And I'm starting to see those certs pop up, those terms pop up as alternatives in job descriptions Love
that's
seeing
cool.
that. It thrills me to the core to see, the barriers coming down. So you're not going to be out a boot camp and a cert. You're not out, $2,500, $5,500 for some of these certifications. Love that. And then the last thing I want to say here is this gives you a career progression that you can look at. You can say, I need an entry level job, so I'm going to do what I have to get it. Here's the part of the world I have to move to, et cetera, et cetera. But you can use CyberSeek to say, you know what, I'm going to move toward that certification because, like we see here, the Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, has 47,000 openings and only
36,000
let's see,
people.
36,000 people who have it, or 36,000 openings for CISM, and you have only 20,000 people who hold that certification. These are where you find opportunities. So my takeaway is certs are, and I feel like this brings us back to the original thing that you said, is like adulting kind of isn't hard. Like this is also like, are certs perfect? No. Are they real? Yes. Are there some certs that can have a lot of impact for your career opportunities? Yeah, absolutely. Is it security plus? Well, based on the numbers here, probably not. But you can say, you know what, here's the progression I want to follow that's going to give me the best career opportunities by doing a little bit of research. And CyberSeek is a tool that's in your arsenal for doing that. And so I would strongly encourage anybody as they're looking at, well, what certification do I want to do next? Use something like CyberSeek, tie it to the region where you live or you want to live, and say, what's going to give me my odds on favorite opportunity to work for the type of company I want to work for, et cetera.
Yeah, I was just saying, I like how you're recommending, instead of just a list of certs, be a little bit more aggressive in your research to determine what'll give you the best leg up. Because I think we're starting to see in hiring, there's a lot of saturation and you're really just looking to stand out, but it's not going to look the same for every person, every organization, every region, and making sure you're assessing it that way. Because we get a lot of questions like the blanket, how do you get into cyber? How can I get hired? And I'm noticing a lot of people answering that with these 3 certs, or I find LinkedIn's my place that I spend my most time on social media. And there's just all these posts. It's like, it's these 3 certs and you're into cyber. Like, that's just not realistic to every single person
No,
that
yeah.
you're reaching out to. And so I really like that difference of approach that you're taking there.
There's something you said there that really resonated with me about being intentional. And I think that's going to be a really common theme as we talk. It's your career, right? Seize it. Nobody else is going to do that for you. Decide what you want, aggressively pursue those goals. There will be some people who are turned off by that aggressive approach to your own career. When I was in 2000, I think it was 2010, I went to training with a guy whose name, I'm going to look it up later on in the show because I want to give him a shout out. He was an E5 in the military, and he's like, I'm going to be a CISO. And I'll be honest, I was an E6 at the time, and I looked at him and I was like, yeah, okay, sure. But you know what? Here's the thing. The training we were in was primarily for officers. One of the guys in there had been selected for general, but he could not put on his star until he successfully completed this training. And we were sitting there. AJ Soria, there's his name. I knew it would come back to me.
Found
AJ
it.
was like, "No, I'm going to be a cis." I didn't even have to look it up. I was just still querying in the background. AJ was like, "No, I'm gonna be a CISO," and he was like so certain of it. And if you hop on LinkedIn and look him up right now, what is he? He's a CISO. So at the time, I was kind of like, yeah, sure, you will. A little E5, whatever. Right? I was working on becoming a better person back then, but I'll be darned. Like he went out and did it, and he took it seriously. And I think that's kind of one of those things. Is like there may be some people who look at you and go, yeah, but I remember him. And like, I didn't work against him or anything like that. We were both going to the same class. We studied together, we worked together, etc. And he parlayed that into exactly achieving his objectives. And there's a lot to be said for setting a goal for yourself, working aggressively to pursue it. Like nobody else is going to do that for you. And I think a lot of people kind of allow life to come to them and they just do the next best thing as they can. but there's a real difference between saying, no, no, here's my goals, here's how I'm going to pursue them, and we're kind of going to will this into existence.
Well, and I think we just did a round of hiring at Arbiter, and the people that came to us and explicitly said, "This is what I want." Now, we didn't hire all of them,
I
but
wish we could have.
I know, right? But there were people that we went back to and said, "You know what? If this is your goal, this is your next step." And it's amazing that type of networking that just naturally happens when you clearly pave that path for people, that they can help you more than when you're like, I don't quite know. Now, there's always opportunities like, I don't know, and find the right person to talk it out to help you define what that path is and what you do want. Because heaven forbid, I had no idea what I wanted. I don't know that I clearly do. Every time I answer that question, I think it's a half joke and a half not joke, because I'm pretty sure I just say I want to rule the world one day. But
It's less of a joke than you make it out to be. That's my experience with it.
It's fine. It's gonna happen. No, I'm just kidding. But I just distinctly remember them, and I agree with you. That set them apart. We remembered those individuals during the hiring process when they weren't giving us this fluff answer of 5 years from now, I want to work for your organization and I want to be helping you in a great way on your team, and I want to have, like, no, if you say 5 years from now I want to be a CISO, or I want to be helping in, trying to think, one of the people wanted to help with the cyber because they wanted to get into digital forensics to prevent trafficking, and I remember him so clearly, and we gave him a couple of places he should go, and so I'd set you apart.
So I just brought out the second article, which it just amuses me to no end, because first article says, here's how we close the cybersecurity labor gap. And the second article, also from the same site,
there is no labor gap.
Says there's no labor gap. And so this one, first of all, this one comes from Rex Booth, who's the CISO at SailPoint. And again, bias warning. I agree with Rex in many ways in this article. So my bias here is, obviously, I think he's brilliant because he and I agree on many points.
Brilliant.
That's how I define it. I think most of us do. So shout out to Rex. Not many on-ramps is something he says here. If you're looking for an entry level, there aren't many on-ramps. I really liked how he said this. This is something you and I have talked about. There are so many barriers for entry. You've heard me talk about my deep and abiding loathing for the experience requirement. I think it locks out people. Experience is code for age. It is absolutely code for age. I think many hiring managers think professionalism. I think many managers think capability, but functionally that's not what it does.
I think they also think maturity. Honestly, I think, which is what you're trying to hit out with professionalism. Yeah, there is a fine, sweet spot. And I took the college route. That is not the route that needs to happen, but it's the route that I took. So it's the route I can relate to the most. But there's a fine, sweet spot between finding your first internship, because they're all like, oh, you need to have years of experience. Like, what's the point of an internship if I need 3 years of experience? Like, how do I get that first? How do I find the internship? They're like, cool, we're looking for no experience, just jump on in. And you kind of hit a sweet spot of freshman, sophomore year. You can really find them a little bit. But by junior, senior year, they're like, absolutely no. Why didn't you already do this? How dare you take a summer to yourself? What do you mean you were played for fun? And then by the time you get out, I had a couple of friends that really struggled because they weren't blessed with internships. They couldn't find them. They couldn't get those entry-level internships. And then upon getting out, the jobs were only hiring those who already had 4 years of internships. And it's definitely difficult with those years of experience barriers.
The other issue that I have, well, first of all, I think I'm quoting Ron Swanson when I say this. He said there are two things he hates. One is lying, and the other is skim milk, which is water that's lying about being milk. And that's my issue with years of experience. You don't actually mean years of experience when you say it. You mean one of, I think, three things, but there might be a fourth here. First one is maturity. You already said it. Second is there are people who mean age. I've seen it at companies I worked with where they were very comfortable. Senior management was in their 50s, 60s, 70s in some cases. And they wanted other people that they hired into senior management positions to also be of that age. And so they put experience and they meant age. Three is a certain level of gravitas, let's say. And I think that comes back to age, but that's what they mean. They're like, well, we want you to be customer facing, so you have to have a certain amount of experience. And what they really mean is we want you to be the sort of person that our customers are comfortable with. And of course, the fourth thing is probably the most common is we want you to not suck at your job. Here's my thing. Say that. Say the thing you mean. Now, if you're saying age, I can understand why they don't want to say that. Well, they can. It's not age discrimination to want to hire somebody over 40, but they won't because they're going to look bad. That's a shame. Here's why I care about this so passionately. I have seen so many competent, brilliant people locked out of various positions because of a simple experience requirement. And here's the thing. We say there's a labor gap shortage. I want to tie it back to this article. We say there's a labor gap shortage, but then we're intentionally excluding applicants. Well, maybe there isn't a labor gap. Maybe there's just a labor gap for the requirements, especially the artificial barriers you've erected to having that position. That's what I believe. And so there's a whole other diversity side of this. And this is something I know we talked about this
love this topic.
Yeah. And by the way, you're doing a talk at the Diana Initiative, right? And your topic is not...
I am, and I'm. It's about something that I could ramble about for hours, and essentially, just a mini shout out to it. It's zero trust to full empowerment, and I'm basically kind of trying to unpack here in the cyber world. We push skepticism, and we push. If it doesn't think and act like us, don't trust it until you've fully unpacked it and understood what it does. And that has an impact on how we treat people. That has an impact on hiring. And I've seen it through the interview process, through the onboarding process, and through the full engagement of teams. And so unpacking what I've seen as to helpful to break some of those barriers that we're creating. And I'm really excited to share those thoughts and ideas, and thankful to the Diana Initiative for giving me the stage to do so. So I'm so excited for that talk.
All right. Now keep the rest of it secret.
You'll have to come check me out in Vegas.
So the point I wanted to make is statistics are stark on diversity inside cybersecurity and in tech and in STEM is essentially this. Every year that passes, we have a more diverse workforce. And one of the things that I've raised is that you cannot, if you are adding artificial years of experience. So instead of saying, and my point is, I'm going to call it artificial years of experience. I'm going to call it artificial years of experience if you didn't say the thing you meant. If you mean competence, say competence. If you mean gravitas, if you mean maturity, whatever, define the things that you actually want. So anything shy of that, I'm going to call it an artificial experience barrier for entry. And the thing is, if you say for this position you have to have 10 plus years of experience, you're literally saying wind back the clock to 2014. Look at how diverse the hiring pool is then. Now subtract people due to natural attrition in the space, because we've seen cybersecurity people leaving because it's too stressful, because it's too lacking in diversity, because it's too, all kinds of things.
I mean, easy one I've seen in the women's space. I see a lot of people leaving because they can't support it and their families, and they need to come back after families. Like that's a big one that I've noticed in my peers, and that's a hard one. And the one that makes me laugh as we talk about user experience is, and I will have to find this, but there was the technology in cyber is changing so quickly. And I guess that's not unique to cyber. That's just technology in general. But there are times where job postings will say you need 4+ years of this technology that's only been around for 2. So you're like, good luck.
Yeah.
Like, how are you going to find that?
I saw a tweet on this just the other day where it was the inventor of a particular, I think he was basically the inventor of a technology was told that he needed to have 4 years experience in that technology, but he had only invented it 2 years previously. And of course, he's the inventor, and he was told he was not qualified as an applicant. This is the other issue that these artificial barriers introduce, which is people just lying on their resumes. And I think, so you're erecting artificial barriers, you're missing qualified, potentially excellent candidates who are young or just hard charging or what have you. And because of these artificial barriers, what are you getting? You're getting people whose ethics are more mutable than others. And you're inducing that and rewarding that.
I also think if we look at it from the other side, you're also having to pay more money for these people. Fun facts, because the minute you add 20 years of experience, so much of this, that's just adding dollars to what they're going to ask for. And when they end up getting hired, which means you now can hire less people, and you're creating even more lack of support. And now you're creating a place where the people are going to be even more stressed because they really have to cover 3 people's jobs instead of 1. Like, these artificial barriers are just hurting more than helping.
One of the things, so I want to go back to the article because I promised I brought it up for a reason, but I think the thing that amuses me to no end is the fact that it immediately Rex dives in and says, the wide-ranging security certification bodies have convinced us that we have to have certs or years of formal training. And you mentioned you went the college route. I did not. Well, I went the college route, then I didn't go the college route, then I went the Navy route, then I went the certification route, then I went the self-taught route, then I went that. I couldn't find anybody to hire me into the job I wanted, so I created the job I wanted by starting the company. Route.
Perfect.
The traditional route, I think. If you went to college, that's cool too. The point that I want to make is we are 2 examples of, you're the person who did it, kind of by the book. And I heard this term from Gartner. They call them new collar workers. I really like this term. HR does not support. And if you read this article, and I do actually encourage everybody to, when we post this, and I try and put the links to both of these in the description so you can jump in and see these articles, read this article. I'm going to step away from it now, but one of the things he talks about extensively is how HR is not equipped. Talent acquisition is not equipped for those new collar workers. They're kind of in a perspective where you get a lot of applicants, you need to filter it down. They're kind of giving you reasons not to hire people. And what I'm proposing is you actually give yourself reasons to hire people. You look at them and say, well, if you have this or that or that. The other thing you talked about, and I care about this a great deal, is you basically said the more requirements you have, the more criteria, the more you have to pay that person. Why don't you talk about that briefly?
Well, and some of this is stealing your thoughts because I've loved this as we were diving through our hiring process pretty extensively here at Arbiter. But the longer age requirement, or really not age, but years of experience you add, naturally those people are going to have experienced a few raises, and so they're going to be used and accustomed to a higher salary within the organizations they were at. Then the more you want someone who has, well, they're a full developer in Python and TypeScript. So we got the back end and the front end. And like the more you add those on, and we want them to be completely red team aware with all these certifications. And we want them to be able to throw in, I'll just throw and a full incident responder. Well, they had to have at some point in their career either taken those certifications or done that for a time within their career, which means that one adds years of experience, but it also adds value to that person as an individual. And that just kind of starts to conglomerate and become more money that they are worth within the industry.
This is how
and
Rex
it's not
said.
even needed because you can't really do all those things at once anyways. You
Right.
really
So
can't.
what Rex said here just resonated with exactly what you're saying. Is essentially you create all these requirements. You have to go to school, you have to have this degree, you have to have this experience, blah blah blah. And now the hiring manager won't hire, and he keeps blaming hiring managers, and I say that that's actually with HR where's the issue, because I think there's a disconnect between talent acquisition side of HR and the hiring manager. because HR's job is to protect the company, as we've talked about, as you and I've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
Their job is to reduce risk to the company. So how do you reduce risk? You find people who've done this before. You find people who haven't, brought shame to the family name in the past. And the thing is, when they add the kind of boilerplate hiring requirements onto this position, they're going to say this candidate is under-credentialed. I'm not going to hire them because there must be a perfect candidate out there. That's what Rex says. The thing is, that perfect candidate with all those things, they don't work third shift sock. He's exactly right. Like, why would you, or for low salary? And I think that's where, and I know I've had this experience when you get the email from a recruiter, like, hey, I've got the perfect position for you. They tell you about it. You're like, yeah, that actually sounds pretty interesting. And then they want to go through multiple rounds of conversations, emails, interviews, maybe a work product that you're going to produce for them. And then at the end of it, they're like, yeah, so anyway, $91,000 and you need to relocate to Poughkeepsie, Illinois. Well, no. And you should have told me that from day one. So here's actually, I'd like to shift a little bit to takeaways because we're running short on time for the hiring side of our discussion, because we need to shift over. And what's going to be part 2 of this podcast is going to be talking about not everything in cyber has to be hard or complicated. But as we talk about, practical applications, here's my opinion. You want to tell me that this position, because I think one of the things when we talk about experience, we're trying to signal someone. When we say in 10 years of experience, we're signaling you that you have this gravitas or age or experience or, whatever it is. I believe the correct way to do that is with a salary range. And then that's what you're telling me. Like, if I want to know how competent I expect you to be on this, I'm going to say, hey, look, if I want this to be an entry-level position, let's say an entry-level red teaming position, I'm choosing just randomly because we recently hired for this. We're going to say, our entry-level red team hiring criteria is, here are the skills we want you to have. We're going to keep that short. And the reason that we want to keep that short is it's entry-level. We are looking for things that you do have, you're likely to have, because we want candidates. We don't want to exclude candidates. So 3 to 5 bullet points of things you can do. If you have experience, please tell us about it. I don't care if that experience is doing competitions like the US Cyber Games. I don't care if that experience is, no, I just have a passion for this. And so I interned as a pen tester. I wrote this, this module for a Sliver C2 because I recognized that there wasn't, whatever. Show me what you got. Show me your GitHub. Show me, whatever, right? Like, we're looking for reasons to say yes, not reasons to say no. That's the first thing. Second
Speak
thing
out about your
is,
home lab setup that you've been hacking for years.
Exactly.
Show me anything.
Entry-level red team, I think we put ours as 90 to 105 as the hiring level. And then I don't have to say years of experience, because here's why. If you've got 10 years of experience as a pen tester, you're not interested in a 90 to 105, 90K to 105 starting salary. Now I've eliminated you. Perfect. I haven't wasted your time. You haven't wasted my time. I'm not trying to tell you you're not welcome here. It's just that's not the position we're trying to fill right now.
Well, and I also really like
put the salary up front too.
Yeah, I like how you pick the salary range for it is dependent on what our business can pay that for and how much money that position will bring into our business, because it's directly then associated with the value that business is. And it's not saying you as a person aren't worth more or you as a person aren't worth and won't be worth more. It's just at this time, what our business can sustain is this percentage and this value to bring in to help support this work that we have, which will bring the business X number of dollars. And we need that to maintain the health of our business, to continue to grow and offer more money to more people and including them later. And so I really appreciate that kind of breakdown within the organization, because it separates the worth from the person. Like, the money does not define the person's worth.
There's so many things I could talk about in relation to this. On the one hand, we've talked about how when you have additional requirements, you're increasing your price. That's also decreasing the number of people, because there's essentially a finite amount of revenue that your company is generating at a given moment. And so therefore, you have to divide that up in some way. And one of the things, and this is an HR hiring manager experience, but earlier I said I think a lot of people just kind of choose the next thing. And so I think the way a lot of hiring takes place is you're like, man, we're kind of underwater and we need a person to do all these things that we don't really have time to do right now. And you go hire that person. I do not believe that is a carefully considered hiring strategy. And so just like I advise individuals to be aggressive in carving a career progression for themselves and pursuing it, I think companies should be similarly aggressive when it comes to designing how they are going to hire. And so to say things like this, I think most employees spend between 60 and 80% of their job doing 1 to 3 things. And then the last 20% is an infinite number of things. It's just the weird edge cases that crop up. And I believe one of the biggest mistakes that's made in hiring is ever putting one of those last 20% things into a hiring rec, because it's not real. And what I mean by that is the last 20% is just edge cases. And what you should be looking for is someone who can handle edge cases, not somebody who can handle a specific edge case that popped up last month. But that is a very human nature thing to do, is be like, oh yeah, I remember this thing we had to do. Oh yeah, and we had to do this. Man, that was super annoying. And so the super annoying things get put onto that. Well, now you're looking for someone who's capable of doing super annoying things. And again, you've just skyrocketed your salary, your demand signal, et cetera. You've shrunk your pool of applicants who can meet that criteria. And it's basically artificial, which is right back to what Rex was saying, is like you get these artificial mandatory barriers for entry, and that's you can't do that. So instead,
and I think you also then get some people that are really good at the edge cases, and then once you hire them on, the meat of what they actually need to do was their secondary skill. Like, well, why did they even get this far? Well, because I had that trauma of last month when we were really struggling with this thing, and they told me how they would solve that trauma, which is great. And that would have been really helpful last month, but that's not going to help you next month.
Yeah. So back to the programmatic approach. Here's the thing. Here's how I'd like to say it. Here's how I think of it internally. If you're hiring people based on the 60-80%, and that 20% ever grows to the point where, you and Steve and Phil and Kyle all have the same thing sitting in their 20%, that's when it becomes a new person's 60 to 80% thing. That's where you hire and you say, okay, this is now a work role. And we're going to build a work role around a couple of these edge cases that have crept into becoming priorities or, major work roles. But otherwise, don't. That's my point, is if it hasn't risen to the point where it's going to take up 60 to 80% of somebody's day, it shouldn't be a hiring criteria. And so there's 2 ways to approach it. One, you say, these are all edge cases, so we're ignoring them in the hiring process, and we're just kind of regressing to the mean. All right, we're saying we're going to say whatever the average thing that we're going to do, that's what we're going to hire, because that's the thing we care most about from a revenue standpoint. Like, these 3 skills are going to generate us the most revenue. Conversely, this one thing has bubbled up as the evil thing that's causing multiple people sleepless nights. Okay, now we're going to hire an expert in that thing who doesn't hate doing that. And it's part of our system and process, and we're going to build process around it. And hiring shouldn't be happenstance. It should be part of an integrated process. The other thing that I would add to that is, like I said, disclose the salary up front, 3 to 5 things, and then whatever it is you don't want to say, that's a bad idea, because the more you keep secrets.
Your example there. What are you trying to say?
So
you don't want to say.
Every company has had, every hiring manager has had this thing they don't want to say about the job, right? Sometimes you don't want to say, we're really busy. Sometimes you don't want to say, this is 3rd shift. Sometimes you don't want to say, hey, I need you to work on site 3 days a week. Sometimes, I don't know, whatever the thing is that you don't want to say about the position, not saying it is a bigger mistake than trapping or tricking somebody into taking a position that will ultimately be more negative. This is a 2-sided coin. If you are lowering your barriers for entry, even if you have something that you're afraid of, right? The dreaded 3rd shift or, what have you. But if you're lowering your barriers for entry, and now we had 400 applicants in 24, it
So
wasn't even a full
many.
24 hours. I assure
So
you,
many.
even if we had had some bizarre requirement, that we, I don't know, needed someone left-handed or something equally ridiculous, we could have gotten one just because of the law of large numbers. And I think
No.
that's the part. Like, don't be afraid to say, what's with the meme that's going around? Say the weird thing. People are desperately searching for connection, right? But that's true in jobs. Like, let them come into this with wide open eyes, knowledge, consideration of forethought. They know what they're going to do, and then you'll have a better hiring experience.
I think our weird thing was just how long Arbiter has been a company and an organization. We definitely had a few of those. And yeah, it was just like acknowledging, yep, we're fresh babies. Welcome.
Yes.
But we're doing pretty good. So I'm not complaining at all.
I'm comfortable if I'm the weird thing. So with that, what I want to do now is we're going to close out this discussion topic, and we're going to move over to the next topic. And so first of all, thank you all for joining us for part 1 of the Phantom Menace. We really appreciate your time. Part 2 will come a week from now. Please feel free to comment. Like I said, please don't hunt me for sport for my opinions. They are just mine. But if you have comments, feel free. Like, share, comment, and follow. And we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.